What would make someone bury a luxury Mercedes in their own yard and cover it with soil like a secret coffin?
A bizarre find unearthing a history of alleged crime and fraud. It started with the discovery of a car buried in the backyard of a multi-million-dollar home in Atherton.
That's the question that rattled one of California's richest neighborhoods when landscapers unearthed a car no one expected. For detectives, the answer came quickly, and it was tied to a man with a past darker than his mansion's walls. The buried Mercedes mystery. It started like the beginning of a thriller. A Thursday morning, October 20th, 2022, on Stockbridge Avenue in Atherton, California. Landscapers were working on a perfectly manicured yard, the kind of lawn that looked like it had been cut out of a glossy magazine. Fresh grass, neatly lined trees, the kind of place where nothing unexpected was supposed to happen. The crew was trenching for new plants when a shovel struck something that didn't sound right. Not a rock, not a root, a hollow ring, sharp enough to make them pause. Another hit. Same sound. They scraped back the dirt and saw plastic sheeting. Then a curve of metal appeared. Smooth, painted, unmistakably part of a car roof. The workers froze. This wasn't junk someone had left behind. It was a sedan-sized secret, buried about 4 to 5 feet beneath the surface of a millionaire's backyard. They called the police. By 8:50 that morning, Atherton officers were rolling up to the scene. The first officers knew right away this wasn't going to be a routine call. Atherton is not the kind of place you expect to find something like this. It's a small, ultra-wealthy town in Silicon Valley, home to about 7,000 people spread over less than 5 square miles. The lots are huge, the homes are massive, and the money is old. This property fit the bill. County records showed the house was built in 1990 on 1.63 acres of prime land. It had sold for about $7.4 million in 2014, then again for about $15 million in 2020. The current owners had nothing to do with any of this. They were the ones who had hired the landscapers who made the discovery. That Thursday and Friday, neighbors watched from behind fences and through windows as crime scene tape went up and television trucks lined the street. Nobody knew what was under the grass. Police kept their answers short. A car, likely from the 1990s, buried 4 to 5 feet deep. Bags of cement were visible inside it. And then there was the detail that really made people nervous. Cadaver dogs had given slight alerts around the vehicle. These dogs are trained to detect the scent of decomposing human remains. The possibility that someone was buried with the car made the entire neighborhood hold its breath.
But so far, Atherton police say there are no signs of human remains or blood, even though cadaver dogs had a possible hit. There were, though, unused bags of cement in the car.
By Saturday, October 22nd, crews pulled the vehicle out with straps and lifted it onto a flatbed. The reveal was stunning. It was a Mercedes-Benz convertible, the top down, stuffed with unopened bags of cement, not just inside the cabin, but in the trunk too. The car was hauled straight to the San Mateo County Crime Lab. Investigators needed to document every detail, test for fingerprints, DNA, or anything biological that might tell them if the car was connected to a violent crime. On Sunday, they went even further, rolling out ground-penetrating radar, a machine that sends radio waves into the soil and reads back the echoes, showing voids or unusual shapes underground. They scanned the area around the pit. Nothing unusual came back. The cadaver dogs had indeed given alerts, but the digging and the radar confirmed. No human remains were on the property.
There's no indication that there are bodies, or a body or bodies in the vehicle, and if they are, they will notify my office.
That closed down one line of fear. The car wasn't a makeshift tomb, but that only deepened the mystery. Why was a Mercedes convertible sitting under an Atherton lawn with cement bags in it? Paperwork started filling in the blanks. The car was identified as a 1991 Mercedes-Benz 500 SL, a V8 convertible that was pure status in early 1990s Silicon Valley. Investigators ran the vehicle identification number, the VIN, through the system. That VIN hit immediately. It matched a stolen vehicle report from September 1992, filed in Palo Alto. So now they had the what? A 1991 500 SL. They had the when, reported stolen in 1992. The where was obvious. The big question left was who and why. The answer led straight to a man whose name was already familiar in Bay Area law enforcement. Johnny Boktoon Liu. Liu had owned the Stockbridge Avenue home from 1990 until 2014, which meant that when the Mercedes disappeared in 1992, Liu owned the house. Investigators found another clue. A close-up of the car revealed a vanity plate that read LEW. That alone didn't solve everything. but it was a heavy nudge in his direction. Detectives started digging through old records, calling agencies and asking the crime lab to check for fingerprints or DNA that could link the car to Lou or anyone else. But even before the science could catch up, the paperwork told its own story. San Mateo County District Attorney Steve Wagstaff confirmed what the documents showed. When the car was reported stolen in 1992, the owner, Lou, collected an insurance payout. The exact number was $86,729. That was the why. Why bury a car? To cash in on the insurance. To really understand it, you have to know who Johnny Lou was. His life was a trail of court cases, fugitive years, and bizarre plots. He was born in Hong Kong and served as a police officer there for several years before moving to the United States in 1959. By the mid-60s, his name was in California newspapers for all the wrong reasons. In December 1965, a 21-year-old student named Karen Sue Gervasi died from a gunshot wound to the head inside Lou's apartment in Inglewood. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sent to prison. But in 1967, the California Supreme Court overturned the conviction because the trial judge had allowed hearsay evidence that shouldn't have been used. Lou was released. Just a few years later, in 1970, there was another shooting, this time in Westchester, Los Angeles. 18-year-old Marcia Dwyer was killed. Her father, Leslie, was injured. Lou fled, spending years as a fugitive before finally being arrested in Canada. In 1977, he was convicted of 2 counts of attempted murder and sentenced to 5 years to life. Yet once again, he would eventually be out, living openly in California. And then came 1999, when he pulled off a scheme straight out of a Hollywood movie. According to state insurance investigators, Lou offered undercover officers $30,000 in cash and about $20,000 in gold watches if they would sink his 56-foot yacht, a boat worth roughly $1.2 million, past the Golden Gate. The goal was simple: make the yacht disappear so he could collect on the insurance policy. The officers didn't sink it. They tricked him instead, hiding the boat in dry dock and telling him it was gone. Then they arrested him. He was charged with insurance fraud, grand theft, and making a terroristic threat. That case put him back in the papers and cemented a pattern that detectives would never forget. High-value asset, claimed loss, big insurance payout. Which brings us back to the backyard in Atherton. It doesn't take conspiracy theories or wild guesses to connect those dots. On November 3rd, 2022, police said it out loud. The car was buried as part of an insurance fraud scheme. No secret murder, no mob hit, just a money play.
They could be reacting to blood, they could be reacting to old bones, they could be acting to human vomit. It could be any one of those combinations of things.
Police confirmed there was no body in the car after they initially unearthed it.
So why exactly was the car buried in that strange way? The car's top was down, which lowered its profile so it could fit more easily into the hole. Bags of cement were stacked inside the cabin and trunk, acting as ballast so the car wouldn't float upward if the soil got waterlogged. The hole was dug about 4 to 5 feet deep, deep enough to hide the shape from anyone doing shallow work, but not so deep that heavy equipment would be needed. Plastic sheeting lined the car, keeping dirt from collapsing inside as it was backfilled. But what about those cadaver dog alerts? Dogs trained to detect human decomposition can pick up trace chemical compounds, even from old or tiny sources. Atherton Police Commander Dan Larson explained that a slight alert can come from many things: bones, blood, vomit, or other traces of human activity. It can also come from contamination, something as simple as a worker cutting their hand and dripping blood on the soil years earlier.
They could be reacting to blood, they could be reacting to old bones, they could be acting to human vomit. It could be any one of those combinations of things.
Detectives reached out to Lou's relatives to fill in the ownership history and gaps from the early 1990s. That mattered because databases from that time weren't always digitized. Police even said they were still waiting on DMV records in the days after the find, even as the larger story had already taken shape. Neighbors, meanwhile, weren't shocked. One told reporters she figured the car had been buried for insurance money. The hole was filled. The tape came down. Life on Stockbridge Avenue went back to normal. What about Johnny Lou? His daughter said that he died of lung cancer in 2015 at age 77 in Washington State. The backyard Ford. The spring of 2020 was quiet in West Yorkshire. Streets were empty, shops closed, and like everywhere else in the world, people were restless under lockdown. With time on his hands, a dad named John Brayshaw decided to make the best of it. He had bought a modest home in Heckmanwike about 6 months earlier, and now that furlough had slowed life to a crawl, he figured he'd finally build the backyard deck his family had been talking about. He ran a string line across the garden, marked the post holes, and pushed his spade into the earth. Just a few inches down, he felt it, a clang that wasn't rock, wasn't root, wasn't anything that belonged there. He scraped more dirt away, tugged at a strip of plastic, and then he froze. Beneath the soil, curved steel glinted back at him. First, a patch of painted metal, then a chrome handle, then a grill. John wasn't staring at debris. He had uncovered a whole car, lying practically beneath his lawn. The scene was surreal. The car lay on its side in a shallow trench. The wheels were missing, but the engine was still bolted in, the doors intact, even the license plate clinging to rusted brackets. Enough paint clung to the body to reveal it had once been gray. When John peered inside, he could see the old-school dashboard and the round gauge cluster that looked straight out of another age. Within days, the story spread like wildfire. Car enthusiasts chimed in quickly. The model was a Ford Popular 103E, the little British pop that was everywhere in the 1920s, 50s, and early 1960s. What threw people off was how complete it was. Most buried car stories turn out to be scraps. A few rusted panels, maybe a frame. This was different. This was an entire car tipped into the earth, and it had the two things that usually solved the mystery fast: a plate and an engine number. But when John called around to local authorities, nothing came back. No registration matches, no hits in the usual databases. Even the previous family, who had owned the house for decades, swore they had no idea there was a car beneath the garden. By the end of that first week, the rumor mill took over. The paint, some said, looked like RAF gray. Maybe the car was tied to post-war secrets. Maybe it had been hidden as part of a spy story nobody had dared to print. It made for great headlines. But it wasn't the truth. The real answer came from something much simpler: a phone call. After the pictures hit the TV news and the newspapers, a man named Nigel Lyles recognized what he was seeing. The plate, the garden, it all clicked. He called the paper and said, "That's my dad's car." His father was Harold Lyles. Harold had moved into that very house in 1964 with his wife, Margaret, and their two boys, Nigel and Peter. The car was the family's daily driver. Harold had bought it in 1958 when it was just 3 months old. He'd originally bought it for Margaret, but she never liked the way it looked or the way it drove. So Harold took the wheel himself and used it for the next 6 years. Eventually, the little Ford broke down badly. The mechanic told him the repair would cost more than the car was worth. And on top of that, he'd have to pay to have it hauled away for scrap. That was the moment that eventually led John's spade to clang against steel 56 years later. Harold wasn't a crook or a hoarder. He was a practical man. Born in August 1920, he'd already lived a lifetime before he ever sat behind the wheel of that Ford. He had fought in the Second World War as part of the British Eighth Army, serving in North Africa and Italy. After the war, he trained as an electrician, settled down with Margaret, and raised his two boys in Heckmondwike. By 1964, the Ford had become more toy than transport. Nigel and Peter used it as a playhouse, climbing in and out, pretending to drive, and using it as their clubhouse. When the car finally quit for good, Harold faced a choice: pay scrap fees for a worthless car or turn it into something else. The solution came almost naturally. Why not bury it? Not out in the open, where it would rot, but underground, tucked away as a kind of family time capsule. To do it right, Harold called his brother, who worked as a builder. Together, they measured out a pit about 7 feet by 10 feet in the garden. Anyone who's ever tried to move heavy furniture into a basement will understand the trick they used. They stripped off the wheels to lower the car's profile and tipped it onto its side. A car is tall, but on its side, it becomes narrow enough to fit without digging an enormous hole. Slowly, they rolled the Ford into the trench. At about 12 feet 8 inches long, 4 feet 8 inches wide, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and weighing roughly 1,600 pounds, 87 pounds, the car was small enough to handle with muscle and leverage. Once it was in, they backfilled the hole shovel by shovel until the gray curves vanished under the soil. The boys lost their play den, but they gained a secret. But Harold didn't stop there. Before the final layer of earth went in, he turned the burial into a real-time capsule. He tucked everyday household objects into the car so that if anyone ever uncovered it, they wouldn't just find steel, they'd find life. A 1940s valve radio, the kind with glowing glass tubes, went inside. So did glass milk bottles. A repurposed medicine bottle filled with paraffin or kerosene for household use. These weren't valuables in the traditional sense. They were snapshots of ordinary living in the mid-20th century. They told the story of a working electrician, his wife, and 2 little boys. They told you what a kitchen looked like, what people used around the house, and how they lived day to day. It was a small act of kindness to the future. Harold died in 1987. Margaret stayed in the area. By 2020, she was 91 years old. And when her grandson Damien called to say the family's old car had been dug up and was all over the news, she burst out laughing. Nigel remembered shouting the old number plate characters out loud when he saw them flash across the screen. Margaret's reaction was even better. She giggled, like mad, the family said, remembering the day in 1964 when she had helped push the car toward the hole while her brother-in-law shoveled earth in. And in a neat twist, Damien was married to the head teacher at John Brayshaw's daughter's school. In the end, the Ford Popular wasn't dug out. After the Lyles family confirmed the backstory, it remained buried under John Brayshaw's yard, as he lacked the heavy equipment to extract it and was even considering building the deck around it. To understand why this made headlines worldwide, you need to know what the Ford Popular 103E really was. It wasn't a luxury coupe. It wasn't rare. It was Britain's everyman car of the 1950s. When new, one cost about £390. It was simple to the point of being bare. Many had only a single vacuum-powered windshield wiper. Some didn't even come with a heater. Performance was equally modest. A test by the Motor Magazine recorded a top speed of about 60 miles per hour and a 0 to 50 sprint in 24 seconds. But that was fine. The 103E wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to carry families like the Lyles around town and out to the coast. The buried Ferrari. It was a quiet winter afternoon in Los Angeles when two boys dug into the yard of a small house on West 119th Street. They were just hacking at mud when their shovel rang on something hard. The sound wasn't stone. It had that hollow metallic ring that makes you stop and listen. They scraped more and uncovered a curve, smooth like the roof of a car. A sheriff's cruiser rolled past on patrol. The boys waved it down. Two sergeants from the Lenox substation stepped through the gate to see what the kids had found. Within a few days, in the first week of February 1978, deputies had a skip loader in the yard, neighbors gathering on the sidewalk, and a tarp-wrapped shape rising out of the ground. Dirt slid off the body. A badge glinted. This wasn't junk. It was a Ferrari. More exactly, a 1974 Dino 246 GTS. Dark metallic green. License plate 832 LJQ. Buried just a few feet under a residential lawn. One of the sergeants quipped to a reporter, "Putting a car in the ground is not like planting cabbages." In other words, someone had gone to serious trouble to hide a very expensive machine. To understand how a Ferrari ended up in the dirt, you have to rewind 4 years. In October of 1974, an Alhambra plumber named Rosendo Cruz bought a nearly new Dino 246 GTS as a gift for his wife. The GTS meant it had a removable Targa roof, so you could enjoy open-air driving without the fuss of a full convertible. It cost about $22,500. This Dino wasn't bare bones. It came with Campagnolo alloy wheels and leather seats in the famous Daytona pattern. Underneath sat a mid-mounted 2.4-liter V6 engine, good for around 140 miles per hour at the top end. Quick, glamorous, and loud, it was the kind of car people turned to stare at. Cruz's wife only drove it about 500 miles before the Ferrari vanished. The night it disappeared is written in police reports. It was December 7, 1974, the couple's anniversary. They celebrated at the Brown Derby on Wilshire Boulevard, one of those old Los Angeles spots with deep booths and celebrity photos on the wall. Cruz told police he didn't like the way a valet looked at the Dino, so he parked it himself on Wilshire. When dinner ended, the space was empty. The report went to the LAPD's Rampart Division. The theft looked like bad luck, just another righteous theft, the phrase cops used for honest victims, in the car-hungry mid-1970s. But that wasn't the real story. The Dino wasn't stripped that night. It wasn't dumped off a pier. Whoever took it wanted to keep it whole. When deputies uncovered it in 1978, they found rugs and plastic sheeting draped over the car, towels stuffed into the intakes and exhausts, fabric tucked along seams. It was amateur preservation. The plan was obvious: bury the car, collect the insurance, then later dig it up and cash in again. Except the crew missed one critical detail. They left windows cracked open. Moisture and soil seeped in. The leather rotted. Worse still, the conspirators lost track of where they had buried it. The Ferrari was forgotten until kids with shovels stumbled onto the roof. A photo by Larry Sharkey showed the car streaked with mud as it came up. Surprisingly intact for something that had spent about 3 years underground, reporters called its condition surprisingly good. That one line lit up phones at Farmers Insurance, Cruz's insurer. People wanted to buy the Ferrari before the dirt had even dried on the tires. Farmers faced a dilemma. The company had already paid the theft claim. Technically, the Dino now belonged to them. That was the opportunity. The problem was the condition. Their investigator, Tom Underwood, went to inspect it. Headlines had called the car good, but reality was harsher. Corrosion ran across the bodywork. Leather had rotted. The roof, windshield, and engine bay all showed damage. Some from burial, some from the crude recovery. Still, Underwood thought a display might attract strong bids. So farmers rolled the Dino into a Pasadena warehouse, opened the doors to the public for 2 weeks, and invited sealed offers. But the idea backfired. Visitors crowded around the Ferrari. grabbing at anything they could touch. And by the end, almost everything that wasn't bolted down had been stolen, even the oil dipstick. Then, when the envelopes were opened, many of the bids turned out to be fake. With the auction ruined, farmers had to track down the few genuine callers from earlier and try selling the car all over again. Farmers had paid out roughly the sticker price, about $22,500. The check went straight to the Hollywood branch of Bank of America, since the bank still held the title. In other words, Cruz hadn't finished paying off the Dino, so the payout went to the bank first. When farmers eventually sold the car, it first went to a businessman named Ara Manoogian. At the time, real estate investor Brad Howard was working with Manoogian on a separate deal and happened to overhear him on the phone, venting his frustration about the buried Ferrari. Howard immediately sensed an opportunity. He made an offer, but only on the condition that the car could be made to run again. Manoogian hired Ferrari specialist Giuseppe Capolonga to tackle the job, and before long, the 2.4-liter V6 coughed back to life. With the engine running and the deal finalized, Howard officially took ownership, and the dyno's fate was sealed. Capolonga replaced the alternator, distributor, and piston rings, while the bodywork, glass, and interior leather were restored. Howard even registered it with a cheeky vanity plate that read, "Dug Up." He drove it proudly, and decades later, he still called it a regular driver, not a museum piece, and insisted he'd never sell it. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.